full meeting. Okay, folks, we're going to get the meeting started. Well, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, November 14th, 2024. Oh, half the month of November already gone. This is the meeting of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for the City of Edina. As I mentioned, it is November 14th, and it is 7:33 a.m. I think Director Benarat indicated that we have community comment this morning for public participation. There are no public hearings this morning. So if you want to call in and address the HRA on a matter of concern to you that's not otherwise on the agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing, feel free to call in. Here's your contact information on the screen. And that will come up fairly fast after the meeting agenda is approved. And so let's call the meeting to order, and I'll ask Ari Lenz, our acting executive director, to call the roll.
Commissioner Jackson? Here. Commissioner Agnew? Here. Chair Huffman?
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, we have a form of meeting agenda that's been published for purposes of this particular meeting to the members of the HRA, the commissioners, and the public. Is there anyone on staff or HRA commissioner that wishes to amend the meeting agenda in any form or fashion? All right. Hearing nothing, is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved. Second.
Mr. Jackson moves. Commissioner Agnew seconds the approval of the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. The meeting agenda is approved. Now we are at community comment. If there is anyone in the audience or in the virtual world, stand by. We're going to ask residents of our community if they've got something they want to address with us that's not on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing. If they want to address the HRA on any matter of concern to them. So let's go to the chambers here first. Anybody in the audience who wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them that's not on the agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing? All right, do we have anybody online?
We do not, sir, but because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait 1 minute before moving on, giving people a chance to dial in if they want. My clock shows that it's 7:36, so I will come back to you when I have a caller, or 7:37, whichever's first.
Very good.
It is now 7:37, and I still don't have a caller, so I think it's safe for you to move forward with the agenda.
Thank you. Our usual practice is following community comment, we have the acting executive director or our executive director respond to the community comments that were made at the prior meeting. Acting executive director Lenz, anything to report on?
Nope, we've got nothing.
All right, very good. We've got a consent agenda with a couple of items on it. Is there anyone on the HRA that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved. A second.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the items on the consent agenda in a single motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. The items on the consent agenda are adopted. We have next sequentially on the agenda would be public hearings. We don't have any public hearings as we indicated earlier today. We have quite a significant amount of work to do in the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. And the first matter in front of us this morning is the potential approval of TIF redevelopment agreements with Enclave companies, DBA Enclave Edina, and Bill Neuendorf, our economic development manager, will make that presentation. And we have folks here that can help assist us, including our public finance team and attorneys. Nick Anhut from Ellers and Jay Lindgren from Dorsey are both with us this morning that helped with the crafting, I think, of these three proposed agreements relating to the Enclave project. So I'm going to turn now to our Economic Development Manager, Bill Neuendorf. Mr. Neuendorf, welcome.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Happy to be here this morning. So today is the culmination of many months, in fact, going on 2 years of work. So a lot of the information that I'll present this morning you've seen before. There's not a lot that's new, but this morning we have the final redevelopment agreements for this redevelopment at the 7235 France Avenue site, currently occupied by the Macy's Furniture Store. So in your packet, you'll find, as promised, 3 legal contracts, about 300 pages apiece. There's been a lot of work involved to get to this point. We're not going to go through it in fine detail, but just rest assured we have the full team here this morning. If you have any questions, helping to prepare this has been Jay Lindgren and Will Elliott from Dorsey and Whitney. Nick Anhut from Ellers Associates are the core to look out for the HRA and the city's interest. And then, of course, the developers, Ben Landhauser from Lifestyle Communities, Patrick Brahma from Enclave are here this morning as well, along with their attorneys who helped craft these documents. There's 2 agenda items this morning that pertain to the same project. The first is the redevelopment agreement. That's what I'll focus on first. And then the second is the creation of the TIF district. The 2 items go hand in hand. What I'd recommend with your consent, Mr. Chair, is to go through both of the proposals first, answer any questions, and then after we have the questions answered, then take action on both agreements, on both the contracts with the developers as well as the creation of the TIF district.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please proceed in that fashion.
So with that in mind, the reason that we're here this morning is really to focus on the proposed redevelopment of the site. The developers are poised to invest over $300 million into that property to completely transform it from the late 70s single-use commercial building, which has been a great part of our community for 40-plus years. We're excited to have Macy's continue on in Edina, just in a different location. And they're poised to see that redeveloped into a vibrant mixed-use destination. As you're aware, as the City Council, you've approved PUD number 25 and all the site plan approvals for this project. So those got wrapped up in September and October. But also, as we've been discussing for several months now, there is a financial gap that hinders this project from moving forward. So for the last several months, as this project built up steam, working through the Planning Commission, working through the City Council on preliminary approvals, we started engaging more in the conversation about what that gap is, why it exists, can we shrink it, can we make it smaller, and then finally, how could the city help as a partner to bridge that gap to actually see this vision become a reality. Our recommendation this morning is consistent with what we had in the term sheet that we shared with you back in July and August, and that is to use a combination of tax increment financing, the traditional pay-as-you-go TIF notes, as well as a small portion of Spark. That Spark program in Edina has a few $1 million in it. Those are tax dollars that have already been collected. In 2021, the city of Edina and every city in the state received a special authorization to invest those dollars, but that special authorization ends next year. And so our recommendation is to tap into some of those Spark funds to reduce our reliance on tax increment financing. So we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. As you pondered how to move forward this morning, I repeated some of the questions that we've discussed earlier in the year, and that's really regarding whether or not tax increment financing is appropriate for this project. This project, as you're aware, has evolved from March of 2023 is when the developer first approached the city with some concepts. Those concepts changed and evolved over time, but fundamentally, as the HRA sits this morning, you're not here as a regulator. You're here as a financial partner to actually see this vision take place. So some of the questions that you might want to consider are whether or not this project delivers a suitable degree of public benefit. Is the use of TIF PAYGO notes warranted to allow these benefits to be achieved? We've also talked about other options in the past. For example, it is theoretically possible to not use TIF if we were to relax and waive a lot of the other city standards, affordable housing, sustainability, park fees, et cetera. But as we've been moving forward to craft these documents, it's our recommendation that we stick with all the standard city policies and use TIF and Spark to bridge these gaps and see this project happen. So there's been a lot of process to date on this site, term sheets, public hearings, et cetera. This morning, we're here to consider the redevelopment agreements, 3 separate agreements, and also to approve the TIF plan. Today we meet as the HRA, so any action, any approvals here this morning are conditioned upon final approval next week at the City Council. So next week in the evening, on the 19th, we'll present the same information in that forum. Presuming the project moves forward with the approvals, they still have to finance it, they still have to build it, and then they still have to get all the inspections and whatnot. So there's still quite a road ahead for the developer, but it all is dependent upon the project getting financed. And after months of reviewing the materials, reviewing the financials, meeting with the developers, hearing from some of their investors and lenders, staff is convinced that there is a financial gap. Without the use of city involvement through TIF and Spark, we don't believe the project will move forward. So I've got renderings of the project. I'm not going to go through those. In Edina,
when you say don't move forward, you mean don't move forward in that form?
Would not move forward in this form, correct.
Thank you.
The site plan that's been approved would not be realized. So in Edina, in addition to the state requirements, we also add another layer of refinement to ensure that anytime the city gets involved with public finance, that there's defined public benefits that are delivered. That's not a mandate by state law, but it follows our practice in Edina and our policies in Edina. So in the report, as we've discussed in the past, there's a lot of public benefits in this project. First and foremost is just the economic benefit. That's something we tend to gloss over because a lot of people get excited about what we're actually going to build. But the main reason that we're doing this is to grow the tax base and strengthen our community. So a project of this scale and caliber would increase the annual tax creation by a factor of 10. It would increase the market value by nearly a factor of 20. So truly a transformational change. Additionally, a project of this scale creates a lot of upfront funding for the city that would not otherwise be realized. For example, park maintenance or park dedication fees, $2.8 million of fees that will be directed to the Parks Department to be used in any park within the city of Edina. About $1.9 million in sewer fees. Not the most glamorous fee structure. Utilities aren't always exciting, but $1.9 million to help the sewer system that serves all of Edina, and $1.6 million to help the water system that serves our whole community. Through this deal, we've also negotiated a park maintenance agreement. I think I mentioned before that was a sticky point with the developer. They weren't very happy about that. But we find since there'll be more people taking advantage of the park, we like that. We like the vibrancy. But the developer has agreed to fund about $80,000 a year in park maintenance fees that would be directed to the Centennial Lakes Park to defray some of the operational costs of that facility. And that's nothing new to Edina. We've been doing that since the 90s when we built Centennial Lakes originally. But this is the first project along the park that we've used TIF in for decades. So we wanted to continue that tradition and make sure that there's a strong funding stream for that park. The other key benefits are the layout of the site, creation of new roads, sidewalks, bike trails. So these are the site plans that we pulled from the approved project back in September. About 45% of the property is outdoor space, and that will all be covered by a public easement, which means that in perpetuity, the public can use that space while the developer is responsible for keeping it in good repair, good condition. The blue spots here show the public art, sculptures and murals that were included in the site plan. Through the TIF agreement, we can lock the developer in to make sure that there's always the public art on the property in good condition. And then one of the most unique things about this project is securing easement rights for the future creation of a pedestrian crossing that would either go under or over France Avenue to connect these two sites across the street, which it's not just about the sites, it's about those neighborhoods. It's connecting the Cornelia neighborhood on the west to the Centennial Lakes neighborhood on the east and vice versa. So no final decisions yet on whether or not we'll actually build that project, but through this TIF agreement, we have secured rights as well as funding should we choose to build that. Affordable housing has also been a key benefit in this project. This is the first one, I think in a long time, that we've done a combination of rental and ownership units. So we'll have rentals in 3 of the buildings and ownership condos in 1 of them. And then indoor public parking. The developer has agreed to issue public easements so that the general public can park in the buildings to either patronize the businesses on site, or to go to the park, or to go to the shop next door, or across the street. And then one of the last public benefits is the sustainable buildings policy. When TIF is used, that policy kicks in. So there'll be rooftop solar, there'll be on-site stormwater. 1 of the buildings will be LEED certified. 3 of the buildings will be National Green Building certified. And then also public benefits, pursuing equity and inclusion. We've defined measurable goals for the contractors to make sure that people and businesses that are underrepresented in the construction trades have a fair shot of getting a job on this project. That extends to both the workers on the site as well as the subcontractors that would have a piece of the overall project. In the past, you've asked us to model other alternatives. What if we approved something else? What if nothing happened? I'm not going to go through that again unless there's questions, but let me back up. We talked about that in October with you. We had some early estimates that I prepared, and we had Ehlers refine those estimates. So the outcome is the same, but we've got a little bit more comparison here. And this is one slide that I think is important to realize or to take a look at. So this is the life of the TIF district, the 25-year district. The red bar on the bottom shows that if nothing were to happen, that's just the slight inflationary increase of the value of the property. If everything were to happen, if the project gets built but without TIF, if we waive all of our policies, waive the fees, and actually build it without TIF, that's the orange bar at the top. If we build it with TIF, that's the blue bar in the middle. So certainly, if we would be willing to relax our policies and standards in Edina, it might theoretically be possible to build this. In October, the developer showed you a sketch of what that might look like. But in the 25-year term of the district, there definitely is a differential. We want to acknowledge that. We also want to acknowledge that the city is going to be here for longer than 25 years. When we build these projects, we're looking at the long-term impact of the community. And that's what this graph shows. So the left portion of this graph is what I just showed you. The differential, though, is look in the years after the TIF district expires. That's when the project with the affordable housing and all the public benefits, when that's delivered, even with TIF, just a few short years after that TIF district expires, the value of that project continues to grow and escalate and surpass a similar project that was built without TIF. So we find both in the short term and the long term, we're able to recognize not just the public benefits of the housing and the parking and all the public space, but also a long-term fiscal benefit to support the community. We've evaluated, as I mentioned, all the developers' financials. We've looked at that tax base growth. We've looked at the impact of the school district and the county and the state. We were also asked to look at the park maintenance fees and what would happen if we built the project with park maintenance fees or without. It's a very simple graph to chart. Without the use of TIF, without the leverage to encourage and ask the developer to do this, that's the blue bar on the bottom. We'd continue to get nothing. When we use TIF and we're able to pursue this goal, we're able to get those park fees. So they stabilize at about $80,000 a year and then escalate at about 2.25% interest. They're not permanent though. They do expire after 30 years. Working with others, we've reviewed their funding. We've reviewed the scale of the project. As you might expect for something of this caliber, as they've repriced it, the price has increased in the last couple months by almost $10 million. So they're currently up to about $309 million and change to build this. The TIF amount is the same though. That's how we use TIF in Edina. Just because their project cost goes up, we don't automatically escalate the TIF. So we're still recommending a TIF contribution about $22.87 million to finance the project. We've reviewed how they'll spend the money, where those cost drivers are, and we've refined the analysis to confirm that there still is a gap. So we have a slide like this for each of the buildings. I'll just focus on one of them very briefly. When you look at the cost to build the project, when you look at the income that's realized compared to the debt service that they have to pay to pay off the project, without the use of TIF, they would have a return of about 5.6%. No investor is going to invest in a project if that's their return for this level of risk. With TIF, we can reach a market return. We're always sensitive to that market return. We want to use TIF just enough to get it financed without over-subsidizing the developer or the investors or the banks. So we've capped our return at 7.1%. This is for the Northwest building. And we find that with the use of TIF, with the project being completed, we'll have enough TIF generation to make those numbers work. The TIF note is the same. It's shown here in aggregate. 22.87 million is the amount of gap that we find in the project. And that's the staff recommendation to fill, using a combination of TIF notes, one for each project, and Spark as well. The terms are the same, and these should look familiar from the term sheet. The risk and responsibility rests with the developer. They have to acquire the site, secure debt, secure investors, go out for bid, get the contractors, manage the project. That all rests with the developer. We've also continued to urge the developer to pursue grants from DEED, Met Council, and Hennepin County. We expect to do that in the spring, in the next grant cycle. So hopefully, if we're successful in that, we'll be able to reduce the amount of city contribution by getting support from some of these other agencies. I want to take just a minute to talk about Spark. I gave a quick introduction, but we didn't talk about this a lot during the term sheet. I just want to make sure that that I talk through it thoroughly. So I mentioned earlier, those Spark funds are in a position where it's a use it or lose it situation. Those are tax dollars originally collected primarily from the Southdale 2 district. They're in an account, and we, as a city, we have until late 2025 to spend or invest those dollars. If we choose not to spend those, we return them to the county. Staff would far recommend that we keep those tax dollars here in the city of Edina rather than sending them to the county and the state. So at this point, we have just slightly over $5 million in our Spark Fund. We funded 3 or 4 projects. They tended to be smaller. The biggest one is the Finch. We put about $2 million towards the Finch to build a new road to get to the park and the back of the properties. But even after those investments, we still have about $5 million left. So we want to make sure that we put that towards good projects that we feel have a real strong shot of getting built in the, before that deadline. So in this contract, we've crafted it so that the leverage and the choice rests with the city, not with the developer. So at this point, we estimate there'll be $1.5 million minimum available to support this project. Our intention is to use Spark once the developer gets their bank financing, and we know it's going forward. Our dollars would serve as equity, and they would go into the project during the construction phase. They'd be secured by a forgivable loan agreement. Dorsey and Whitney prepared that document just to make sure in case anything goes wrong, those funds are repayable to us, to the city. We also gave the city flexibility that in case there's more monies available, we have until midsummer next year to alert the developer that we'd like to use more Spark, and then they can adjust their equity investments as well. The key driver there is for every dollar of Spark that we use, it's one less dollar of TIF. And so that's what we're trying to do here is maximize the resources we have rather than run a risk of turning those dollars back over to the county. Once they go to the county, there's no assurance they'll be returned to Edina, right? They could be invested anywhere.
Commissioner Jackson has a question for you, and I do as well on this slide.
Yes, thank you,
Jackson.
Mr. Chair. So there's a lot on this slide.
Yes.
If you say that we are putting money in as equity partners and it's structured so that if it's sold, it's a forgivable loan, tell me a little bit about the equity interest that the city will be getting.
Yeah, and that's not how it works.
Okay,
So-
I'm really foggy on
Sure.
what this is.
So if we use Spark, well, normally Edina uses a TIF note, and that note is issued after the project is finished. And we can point to the shiny project, and it's there, and we know where the money's going. In this instant, we don't have that amount of time to use Spark. The right to use Spark expires in about a year. And so we need to put those dollars in earlier. So once it's under construction, I don't have a finished project, but I have a started project. And so at that point, we feel confident that the project will move forward. But rather than just giving them the money as a pure grant, hypothetically, if we did a grant, if the project were to fail and not get finished, our money would be gone. So instead, we want to secure it as a forgivable loan, which the loan would be forgiven the minute they finish the building. Because our goal isn't necessarily to maximize the return. We're not an investment bank. That's not how these dollars are set up. But it's to get good projects built in the community. So essentially, we would provide the funding to the project. There's no return. There's no interest rate. Unless they fail, then there theoretically would be.
Okay, so that's not answering my question.
Then maybe I missed the
So,
question.
Mike, this is complicated. So, a couple of things. First of all, will we have an equity interest in this project going forward?
Not as an equity investor, no.
So it will operate like a grant, even though it's not technically not a grant.
Correct.
Okay, so then in the Spark agreement or policy that we set up, I was under the impression that we wanted to actually use these larger amounts as loans so that those funds would recycle into future projects. So tell me how this is not a loan, and it's not structured as a loan, but how did we make that jump from preferring loans to, I'm going to call it a quasi-grant?
Sure. And I might ask Nick Anhut to get into some of the details. But you're correct, that was our goal in 2021. When the program was established, our hope was to be able to create a revolving loan fund. We've learned over time that the way the state law is written and the way that it's structured, that's not possible. And so it would have been great if it would have worked out that way, but maybe maybe Mr. Anhut can provide a little bit more detail on that. But we just found what we had hoped would work in that fashion won't work out.
Thank you, Nick
Brandon,
Anhut
go
with
ahead.
Ehlers and Associates, and yes, we've combed over the statute, and as we understand it, it is derived from TIF dollars from Southdale 2, so it is still treated as tax increment dollars, and the state auditor has provided opinions about how they need to be restricted in their use. And so when you use these dollars for a project, if you use it as a loan, which is authorized, the dollars that come back need to still be returned and treated as if they were tax increment dollars. And so they would be restricted in their use and how you could apply them to other projects. You would also need to report on those activities annually, which also incurs some administrative burden and cost over time. So if it were structured as a loan, there would be a requirement that you continue to report on them, and then you would only be able to use them for specific activity related to the original TIF district, which was a economic development district in Southdale 2, and there would be a very limited type of project that you could potentially use those dollars to assist. The second point that I will add as well is that when you are lending money that needs to be repaid to the project, you're providing a benefit to the development, but you're widening the gap slightly because now they need to actually repay those funds. So we would not necessarily be able to stick to that original gap amount if you did structure this as a loan. We'd have to think about maybe expanding it a little bit. So instead of 22, it might be 23 million or 24 million to kind of offset that future repayment liability. So kind of those two reasons together led us to a conclusion that we should try to strive to potentially use this resource, which we don't have to, but would potentially provide some benefit to the project, would limit the HRA's TIF liability into the future, but maximize how much the Spark dollars could actually offset the gap for this project and what we would actually anticipate you'd be able to use those funds for in the future.
Thank you.
Mr. Agnew.
Thank you. I want to build on that a little bit more. So if it were repayable, or we asked for it to be repaid, and it still had those constraints on it that you mentioned of needing to be applied within like the similar TIF district area, and we weren't able to do that, what would happen to that money? Would it have to just sit there, or does it get kind of re-collected in the way that it's outlined here on the screen?
So normally under a TIF district, when you have funds that are left over, you potentially have the authority to continue to use them for the original purpose that they were applied. You need to maintain them within the funds, you need to segregate them, and report on their activities. There is increasing legislative pressure to return those dollars at that point in time, but the way the statute is written right now, you're actually able to hold on to them as long as you continue to report and be transparent about how they're being used. You can still hold on to them in the hope that you would have a qualified use in the future. But you do, again, need to continue to report on those activities, and it's actually a fairly lengthy and stringent reporting requirement. So I hope that answered the question.
It did. Thank you. I have another broader question about Spark. And I do see kind of the flexibility here in the 1.5 to the 5 million, and I know we'll be talking about Spark later on as well. Are there any other projects in the pipeline that you've had conversations about that might be able to use these funds? And if so, do we still have that flexibility to invest into smaller projects between now and then determine how much to invest into these larger projects?
We do have the flexibility. So at this point, there's no large project that we're aware of where we could invest the Spark money instead. We still have, the reason we gave a range of dollar amount, a few months ago, you authorized a small business forgivable loan fund, a small business grant fund, actually. I still hope to get another 2 or 3 of those done in 2025. So I've withheld some of the monies in hopes that I can find a few of those other businesses. I continue to promote that project and continue to reach out. The ability to use these monies is pretty limited, so I've only found one so far, but we'll keep looking. And I think by the end of the year, we can probably find a few other ones to support in that small business program. But at this point, we don't see any other big project that would be a better use of the larger amount.
Thank you. The one I'm remembering is the Enclave, and I love that type of work, investing into smaller businesses, revitalizing some of these areas. So would love to leave that option open as long as we can, and appreciate you continuing to garner interest into that. So thank you.
So on your second bullet point under number 1 here, it says forgiven after each lot completed, and we know you've got some range of flexibility that you're requesting under bullet point number 1, but under bullet point number 2, when you say forgiven after each lot completed, do you mean that there's a portion of it forgiven after each lot is completed? Do you have it subdivided, or does each lot have to be fully completed and all 3 have to be completed before there's a forgiveness?
Yeah, good question. So the way that we've written the language, there's a separate redevelopment agreement for each of the parcels. The northwest mixed use, the southwest condo mixed use, and the east. We're not sure which one is going to go first, and so we included the Spark option in each of those contracts. So theoretically, if the east buildings are built first, we'd probably direct the Spark funds to that project. So once those are finished, we would forgive it. In case one of the other ones goes first, we'd probably direct the funds to that one instead, and when that one's completed, we'd forgive it. Right now, the folks at Enclave and the folks at Lifestyle Communities are working their tails off trying to get multiple sites in progress at the same time. So it might be possible that we do half to one site and half to the other. There are so many options. We're not, at this point in time, I can't tell you which one's going to go first. But they would not have to complete everything to see those funds forgiven. It's really on a lot-by-lot basis.
Okay. And Mr. Lindgren, you're satisfied that the language of the agreements cover that so that you have and staff has that flexibility?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, again, Jay Lindgren with Dorsey and Whitney. Yes, I am, and the other thing is we always have to keep in mind, it's been mentioned, but there is a December 31, 2025 fully expenditure of those costs. So that's why I think it's important to figure out which one goes first and make sure we fully utilize the Spark. And those 3 sets of documents, I think, cover it well.
Mr. Anhut, could you come back up, because there was a question that came to my mind after my fellow commissioners asked you a couple of questions. So if you used an actual loan repayment mechanism and the loans were repaid before December 31, 2025, and because Spark requires that those monies be fully expended or be returned to the county at the end of 2025, my sense was that you were saying that there was a way to sort of pool those, if you would, and reallocate them to other projects beyond December 31, 2025, if it was a pure loan as opposed to a forgivable grant. Was that a correct interpretation or not?
Mr. Chair, if you established a loan, it would not have to be repaid before that time. The statutory requirement is that we actually use those dollars to expend them on a project. So if we structured it as a loan, we'd need the developer to be able to show that they've actually been able to take those proceeds and use them for development activity on the site, whichever site goes first. They'd have to do that by December of 25. You could have a loan outstanding and repayable over time after that point, but any of the dollars that come back in repayment in that loan are still considered tax increment dollars that need to be returned to the original TIF district. And so we'd have to segregate and set up a fund that doesn't need to exist at this point in time anymore, and keep it open until those funds are fully repaid. We'd have to report on that liability, take those dollars in, and then those dollars that come back can only be used for qualified costs of the Southdale 2 TIF district as it was originally intended. And that's a very limited, narrow view of type of project that we would potentially use this. So this was a temporary allowance given by the legislature because of the pandemic and the lingering effect of all the impacts to the financial markets afterward. There was a lull or an inability to finance development projects. And so the legislature gave cities across the state this authority to leverage existing TIF dollars in a way that they otherwise would not be able to do. And so that's what we're trying to take advantage of, but we need to understand that if we set it up as a loan, the dollars that come back are not going to be able to be used that way anymore. They're going to have to be as originally intended prior to the legislation, restricted to Southdale 2 and its activities.
All right, so and this may take us full circle again, but as the three of you, this, what I would call a really first-rate public finance advisory team, economic development director, and incidentally, I thought this work was just superb. The presentations, the agreements, as I went through all the materials, I thought really this was really superior work that was done on behalf of the city of Edina. So you must have thought about all of these things as you were deciding that this should be a forgivable loan as opposed to the straight loan with the possibility of having some of the money come back into a TIF district after December 31, 2025. How did you come to that conclusion, I guess, is what we would all want to know, because that'll help us understand better what to do.
Sure. A couple reasons, and it's really, they're all pragmatic, quite honestly. So it certainly was compelling to consider becoming an equity investor into this project. We've not done that before, and we don't know another community that has, so we'd be charting brand new water, and we needed to get this project done by the end of the year so they can meet their closing deadline. So we weren't confident that we'd be able to figure all that out in the window that we had. The other time constraint is really that 2025 deadline. When we first started the program, we thought we could pledge the dollars by 2025, and then maybe they're spent in 26 or 27. And in the last couple of years, the state auditor's office has made it very clear, no, the dollars are spent. If they're not spent out the door in someone else's, in some contractor's pocket, paying their employees and their suppliers, you can't use the money. So we wanted to be sure that we don't run the risk of losing the dollars. December 2025 is 13 months away, and all these projects take time. So we felt that the best use of these dollars was to ensure that they get invested here in Edina. Since we have also been talking about these public improvements, the pedestrian crossing and things like that, the other thinking was if we can rely more on Spark and less on TIF, that creates more TIF options for the community in the future. So it's just those pragmatic reasonings. It would have been fantastic to do an equity deal. We don't want to risk it at this point.
I see you. Yeah, you kind of leaning into the microphone there. Maybe you had a supplementary comment.
I just would also comment that I think it provides a little bit more bang for the buck than we otherwise would have been able to get out of those dollars. So as I mentioned, a repayable loan, we would actually think that we'd need to maybe offer a little bit more to get to the same place.
Yep.
I also think that we want to be careful about thinking about equity investment in a project. When you're an equity investor, you're also exposed to the downside of the project, whereas right now, we are not, right? It's all incumbent on the developer and the owner of that property to maintain it and operate it as a successful property. An equity investor would be part of that responsibility and have to maintain and maybe be exposed to years when it's not paying for itself into the future. And so thinking about those types of things, it seemed like a much more consistent role for the city to offer this as a forgivable loan.
It's somewhat akin to what we did with the theater.
Very similar.
We loaned the money to build out rebuild the Edina Theater, and then if they stayed in operation a certain number of years, portions of the loan were forgivable.
That's exactly correct. And the key thing there is the community loved that historic sign, but we didn't want to get involved and get into the headache of fixing it and repairing it. But the owner was willing to take that responsibility.
Commissioner Jackson's got some follow-on here, I think.
I've got some unrelated questions, so I don't want to interrupt the conversation about this portion of it.
Okay, but related to the presentation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. I think we're probably done with
Okay,
this
great.
particular subset.
So I just want to make sure, talking about the underpass, if we decide on the underpass and we want to pay for it with TIF dollars, will we need a new TIF district, a new TIF agreement? Tell me a little bit about the process for getting to that, to pay for that underpass, if we decide on it.
Sure. So if we do decide to move forward with that underpass or any similar kind of improvement in that area, by the end of next week, we will have created 2 TIF districts, one on the west side of the street, one on the east side of the street. Those TIF districts, that's enough at that point. So there's no need to create a new one. And the decision about building the underpass completely rests with the city. So regarding the design, the specific location, the cost, all the details, that's a city choice, not a developer choice. And the timing to build it is also with the city. You know, if we build it sooner, it's probably a little bit more cost effective to build it sooner than later. But again, that all rests with the city. Right now, we presume that TIF from the west side of the street and the east side of the street would be able to pay for most of that project. But we still want to go to look at federal sources, state sources, because improvement of this type can benefit so many different groups of people. And so there's different funding programs out there. If we have to rely on TIF, you know, that's a good backstop, but we hope to find other options.
So just to be perfectly clear, we won't be back in this position again, creating a new TIF district, a new TIF agreement, and so on and so forth, if we decide to do the underpass. That the existing documents, should we approve them, would be sufficient.
Correct.
Okay, great. And then sort of you mentioned grants. We're pursuing grants for this. If we approve it, we'll continue to pursue grants for this development. Are the documents drafted in such a way that would reduce the TIF amount?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. For any dollar grant received, the TIF contribution would be reduced.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Commissioner Jackson raised an important point, I think, for conversation for not only us but the public, and that is with respect to the underpass. So the way you've structured this potential TIF agreement is that on the increment that would be captured, 25% of it goes to the city. And the reason it goes to the city is because we haven't made a decision on what to do with that underpass or passageway, whatever you want to call it, under France Avenue. But we were going to be able to aggregate 25% of the increment to potentially do something like that. If the city were to determine downstream that wasn't what we wanted to do, but we'd captured that 25% increment, what are the other things we can do with it?
Sure. There's a few other things we could do. Any kind of public infrastructure work in that immediate vicinity would be eligible. So France Avenue is a county road, so that gets to be kind of odd. But if there's improvements necessary on France Avenue in that immediate portion, we could make those improvements. If there's other utility improvements that we haven't already thought about in that immediate area, we could fund those as well. Bicycle improvements, sidewalk improvements, utilities, street lighting, all those kind of basic infrastructure things in that immediate vicinity, we could use those dollars could be used for it. We've also written in an option in the TIF plan that affordable housing could be a legitimate use. So if we decided not to move forward with the underpass, we could use that 25% to support funding of a different affordable housing project somewhere else in the community. And then there's always a pooling provision, which allows some of the TIF dollars to be spent on infrastructure in other areas. So there is a financial cap on that. We'd work with others to figure out what exactly is available, but it's really affordable housing and public infrastructure. So the option we wanted to give the council the greatest flexibility to decide what's the best use of those dollars in the future when they're available.
Good. This has caused Commissioner Agnew to think of something she wanted to address as well, and I want to come back to one other topic.
So this is more broad, and it goes back to some of the previous conversations we've been having about this project and some of the public amenities. And what I really like about this project as a whole is not only the general mixed use that we're seeing as a part of the multiple sites, but the vertical mixed use. That's a core component to this. We'd had a couple of conversations with the developer about some type of community-focused area within the northwest building. Multiple ideas were thrown out. We weren't committing anything. We weren't locking anything in. But now that I'm looking at Article 3, specifically within the document here, I'm wondering if there's a way we can add something in there as well to require in this component of a open kind of public community draw location as opposed to just something that would be for residents within that building. Is that something that's still possible at this stage?
I might ask the developer about that. I'm not familiar with that previous ask, and also Mr. Lindgren. So is this just a space? Is it an open space for recreation, or is it is it a place that would be a community room where you've got a lock on it? And
well, and see,
I'm
I think
not sure
that's part of my question is we'd had a couple of conversations and it was kind of vague, and I think it was relevant in the sense that they weren't able to go in and get a contract signed with anyone until we were progressing along with the project. And my biggest concern is wanting to make sure there's some type of contractual obligation that they do something that is more of that community draw, and not something that is purely for the residents of this area. I want it to draw people in. And so I'm being vague because I don't want to contractually over commit to what this needs to be, but I do know that we weren't able to have a firm alignment when we were going through the site plans on what this would be. So maybe come up and speak to me about where we're at right now, and then I'll turn the question back to, is there any way to contractually include this within the document?
Mr. Brahma, thank you for coming up, and identify yourself, please, for the record.
Good morning, Chair, members of the HRA. Patrick Brahma, 1660 South Highway 100, St. Louis Park. I'm with Enclave Development Team. Happy to respond to the question. And yes, there's been a dialogue, and we totally haven't landed on something specific. There's a few things that I can offer on that northwest building as far as interaction with the public, enhancing the public benefit within that mixed-use building. So one thing that we did that doesn't directly answer your question, but I just want to make it known, it was kind of in the vein of trying to head down the path of making that building more publicly accessible and inviting for the public. First, from a design perspective, as the project morphed over the months, so the last several months, we ended up actually expanding the public realm area physically. Everybody that's close to the project is aware that there's a east to west public plaza that runs through the center of this site. Where that plaza touches that northwest building, originally there was no bump into the building. We ended up actually carving out an area for expanding the public plaza kind of into the building footprint more, so it's a wider public plaza in that area. So there's greater public outdoor area against that site. That's one thing. Secondly, because we didn't know exactly the size, square footage, or exact location, one thing that we are incorporating in that northwest building that's not a part of a contract is a large conference room or center. We don't know if that's one room, two rooms, if it's work from home units. We haven't programmed it yet, but we're intending to have some sort of conference room that could be used by our tenants, like the office tenant maybe uses it for a conference that they have, maybe the residents of our building use it, but also because it's up against the public plaza, the public could access it, and we could rent it to the public. The public could use it as a public community room for their use as well. And so then it could be rented through our rental office, which is on the same floor adjacent to that as well. As far as taking it a step further and committing to, like we were talking about theater, or is there other event spaces there? We haven't we haven't programmed any of that. It's still all spec space. That's right now JLL is marketing it. We're working with prospect tenants now. No commitments at this point, but those are the things that we have done and could commit to if you do want it part of the contract now. I don't know if that answers your question.
It sort of does, and I think that we continue to have this vagueness to it, which I acknowledge with where we're at in the process. I do understand that, but it's also why I want to have something written in there that is requiring some type of use. And I feel bad because I'm not being able to be like as prescriptive in what I want to see, nor do I think that I should be. But specifically what I'm looking for is something that will be open to the public and draw people to this site. And that's where we had talked about, whether it's a comedy club or some type of theater or some type of community activity center. I don't think that a conference room that can be rented out meets that expectation. And I don't think that purely extending the outdoor space, unless it were heavily programmed year-round, similar to what we see at 50th and France, I don't think that that meets my expectation either. And so it's something a little bit further down, but obviously I don't want to include specificity to the point of it has to be a comedy club. Like, that doesn't make sense. I want some freedom and mobility in what this actually gets programmed as, but I want it to be something that draws people into this site and is open to the public.
All right, let's think about it this way. What you're asking for today is approval of the redevelopment agreements with Enclave, conditioned on final approval by the city council. So it strikes me that between now and the 19th of November, when we're going to meet as a city council, you could discuss this issue that's been raised by Commissioner Agnew, to see if we could either amend the contracts that potentially get approved today, or agreements. They're all conditioned on city council approval anyway.
Right.
To see if you can work something out, and then we could address it at the council level. Commissioner Jackson has a thought too.
Yeah, just a question of information. When 50th and France was redeveloped and that public space, was that part of the funding agreement to have programming there, or what was the mechanism for that?
For the Nolan Mains project, the commercial uses were chosen by the developer. So we knew they wanted at least 2 restaurants. So they ended up with 2.5 restaurants, basically. But as far as specifying the type of business, it's tough to do that because now you've really limited your pool of possible tenants. And for the programming, the outdoor space, that was written into the Nolan Mains, if that was also part of your question?
My question is, what was written into the agreement when we did that redevelopment?
So in the retail element, there was no requirement for the type of tenants.
Okay.
Just any allowable retail use per the zoning. And then for the public space, we knew that the public space would be programmed, but we didn't specify the type of event or the day of the event or anything like that. We just wrote that it shall be allowed to be used for events.
Yeah, I think seeing that language would be really useful for us before this comes forward again, so we can kind of say what we've done before.
So there's an easement, or I'm sorry, there's an exhibit. I don't remember which number, but it's the Public Plaza exhibit. We swiped that from Nolan Mains, so it's part of the agreement today. But it only addresses those outdoor public spaces. There's no mention of indoor tenants.
Okay, so this agreement has the same requirement that the Nolan Mains agreement had.
Very similar, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Brahma, you had a little side conversation with Mr. Gleekel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, members of the HRA. I just wanted to, that way we have a productive conversation between now and the City Council meeting next week. Just want to clarify a couple points, and maybe we're already on the same page, but that northwest building, the second floor includes office. There's office space. I think it's 13,500 square feet of office space that were in the approved plans. That's being marketed by JLL. We assume the office user would use that, or would be the prospect tenant. JLL is aware of our desire to find a creative use that we've discussed as a potential use in the past. So they're trying to market to entertainment groups as well to see if they can get any interest. There's also 5,900 square feet of first floor retail commercial space. Again, JLL is marketing that. Perhaps there's a user that would take both floors. Maybe there's a creative use. Maybe it's a club. We don't totally know what it may be. The likely use where the market demand is some sort of restaurant user on that first floor fronting France. So I just want to be transparent. That's currently what we're doing. That's what's in the plans. That's our anticipation. It's part of our pro forma, is having those go out and get leased by the market. Again, we've provided the direction and the preference from the city to look for those types of users. The other thing that's unique in the building is on the first floor we have a office and amenity area, and then we also, and I can't, don't quote me here, but I don't know if it's 1,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet, but there's a chunk of space that's kind of wedged in between our lobby amenity area and the commercial area. That space is to be determined at this point in time, and that's where we envision some sort of conference room that's up against the larger public plaza area. So I think there could be flexibility in the programming of that area and having some sort of conference room. Maybe that the outdoor public area, that's obviously the programming isn't final determined at this point in time. There might be some flexibility there as well, but I wanted to get those pieces out there in case they aren't known, and those would be the pieces that I'd be thinking about working with staff on. But my only pause is that if the leasable space that's in those two areas that I mentioned, the second floor and the first floor, if that was diverted away from being able to make it let the market lease it at leasable rates, that'll change the economics of the project. I just want to be transparent about that as I work with staff.
So we're happy to chat in the next couple of days.
I think that's the way to take it now, is to talk to staff about it. It's a good idea, and I think Commissioner Agnew was saying, take a look at it between now and the city council meeting, and then we can revisit it there. The only other thing I wanted to cover today was to make sure that we understood your staff recommendation here and that everything's contingent on city council approval, but when you talked about the but-for test, I think at least I'm pretty comfortable with that. But just to revisit one more time, the key question I think you had in your memo, and that was, does the completed project deliver a level of short-term and long-term public benefit as defined by city standards, guidelines, and policies that warrant the use of tax increment financing? And then you had an extensive list of public benefits that would be delivered by the developer as a result of this project. And I think those are all either in your memo or in your slide presentation. And then you also had some key elements I thought that were important to consider that we don't normally see, and that is one of the things we've been worried about is how are we going to continue to finance that beautiful Centennial Lakes Park and make sure it stays in great shape. And I thought the bar graph that you had that showed the fiscal benefits, the citywide park dedication fee that will amount to almost $3 million, and the Centennial Lakes Park maintenance fee of 3.21 were really important considerations here as well in terms of public benefits. So I don't know if you'd want to revisit anything relative to public benefit at this point in time, but as I look at your memo you went through, maybe I can help you a little bit. Compliance with site approvals, compliance with sustainable building policy, creation of new rental and ownership affordable housing units, creation of new outdoor public realm spaces, including roadways, sidewalks, bicycle trails, landscaping, streetscape, and public art, coordination of site plan with future France Avenue pedestrian crossing, creation of new covered parking stalls, public parking stalls, and those number, what's that total number in all those buildings? Remember?
About 140?
I was going to think, that was in my head, it was 140 exactly. Yeah, delivery of permanent public easements at no cost to the city, pursue goals to contract with disadvantaged businesses and hire capable workers who tend to be underrepresented in the construction industry, and then those annual payments in support of the park maintenance fund, and then those upfront payments on the city's park fund, sewer fund, and water fund. And there are additional benefits as well, like funding for potential bicycle and pedestrian crossings. So I take it all of that led to you making the recommendation from a staff standpoint. I want to make sure that's clear too, that you recommend that the HRA approve the redevelopment agreements with Enclave, Edina LLC and Lifestyle Communities LLC, conditioned on final approval by the Edina City Council. Is that correct?
Correct. That whole package of benefits is what led to our recommendation.
And then the same thing with motion to approve Resolution 2024-07, establishing the 72nd in France, number 3 tax increment financing district, again, conditioned on final city council approval.
Correct.
Okay.
Same recommendation, same project.
That cause either of the commissioners to have any further follow-up? Commissioner Jackson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the past, the TIF agreements that I've approved have included something beyond the 4 corners of the property. And I think it's very important to point out that this was designed in order to accommodate the underpass, and then, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, the money for Centennial Lake. So that's a very important persuasive thing for me, to have that benefit beyond the 4 corners of the thing. So for future developments, when they come to us, I hope that that is what's in people's mind, that it isn't just to build the thing, but also to improve the overall city.
Thank you. I think we'll take these separately. First of all, is there a motion to approve the tax increment financing redevelopment agreements with Enclave Edina LLC and Lifestyle Communities LLC, conditioned on final approval by the Edina City Council?
So moved.
Commissioner
Second.
Jackson moves, Commissioner Agnew seconds. The motion is stated. Any further conversation about the motion? All right, all those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. The motion's approved. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2024-07, establishing the 72nd in France, number 3 tax increment financing district, again conditioned on final approval by the Edina City Council?
So moved.
Second?
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Agnew seconds. The motion is stated. Any further conversation on the motion? All those in favor of adoption of Resolution 2024-07 by motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Motion to approve Resolution 2024-07, establishing the 72nd France number 3 tax increment financing district is approved based on condition on final city council approval. And just a final comment for you, Mr. Neuendorf. As I went through all the materials here, and over time as you've worked on this, I think it's really exceptional work. And to have the team that we have that represents the interests of the residents of the city of Edina, one of them who happens to be a resident of the city of Edina, who has a special vested interest, in addition to being one of the foremost attorneys in the state at the work that he does, and our public finance people, and all of those that were involved on the other side of this agreement. The level of cooperation, I would say, is extraordinarily impressive, and the comprehensiveness of the agreements is really a model for anything that gets done, I think, anywhere in the country. So congratulations to all of you for working on this project that's going to create a $300 million plus amenity in our community. It's really going to help take an area that was 60 to 70 years old and reshape it and take it from something that could have been average to something that's really going to be exceptional. So thanks for all that. Good work. Now, we're not done. We've got one more matter here, and incidentally, the city, we're going to reconvene here as the city council and canvass the vote when we're done with this meeting. And the other matter we have before us this morning is 7200 France Avenue South. Staff has been working with the developer there on some of the financing issues and the loan agreement. And Stephanie Hawkinson, our affordable development, housing development manager, will present. And we've got some folks here to assist if we need answers to questions.
Yes, good morning and thank you. And I'll try to be fast because I realize that we're running short on time. So today's request is to authorize staff to engage Dorsey and Ellers to prepare Spark agreements and all the corresponding loan documents for 7200 France. This is I'm also requesting approve a deviation of the affordable housing policy to allow for 8% of the units to be affordable, but in perpetuity. Instead of 15 or 10% of the units being affordable for 30 years, having 12 units be affordable forever. And this is also to engage our consultants to draft a first amendment to the existing 7200, 7250 redevelopment agreement to reduce the percentage of increment being pledged to that. So why today? And this graphic was prepared by the Twin Cities Housing Alliance because it's been brought up about the whole issue of site plan approval versus funding and why that order. And so they created this graphic when they do trainings that developers don't know what's being approved, so they don't know the final costs. So during the site plan approval process, sometimes more articulation is requested, or greater setbacks, or more glazing, or there's something that could be added to as a condition for site plan approval that affects costs. So often projects, the general process is you go through the site plan approval process, then you know what your project is, and then you can establish what the costs are. So this was recently, the site plan was recently approved. They priced it out based on that, and then we can know what the costs are and determine what is viable, whether or not there's a gap. There's also, right now, there's seasonal considerations. They would like this to, it takes a while between approval to get all the final construction docs done so they can be permit ready, get the footings and it out of the ground prior to winter conditions setting up. This helps reduce the amount of gap. Winter conditions increase costs for construction, and so that increases the gap because their revenue won't increase. So that's one reason why this is coming in so quickly after site plan approval. So you know the site. We've talked about it a lot. So 7200 France. We have, this was the former office buildings. It's now a vacant site. The public realm improvements were approved previously. They were approved in April of 2023 with the approval of 7250. So all those site improvements, the site plan, all that has been previously approved. This was at the time an empty box. Part of the what was been approved, there are two TIF notes for 7250. One for the construction of the building, and this part B was if 7200 gets built, then they get the B note because what was happening was the parking for 7250 is in 7200. So it helps offset that. Plus you have the increment, you need the increment from 7200 to help support the TIF and the redevelopment agreement for 7250. So even though this is a separate project, it is very tied into one that has already been previously approved. So you recently approved the site plan as council for 7200. It's 150 apartments. They reduced it by 3. So 12 forever affordable apartments. It's located along a transit corridor and complies with the sustainable building policy. So that is
just to make it clear, 150 was what was originally approved, and then
it went up to 153, and now it's back to 150.
Yep.
They did some reconfiguring of unit mixes, so 2 bedrooms take up more space. This project, as with the consideration of the site plan, does comply with multiple plans that have been previously approved. The Race and Equity in Edina implementation report, our biannual survey where affordable housing is deemed as a major issue, our comprehensive plan, our sustainability and green policies. One of the green policies was increasing the average population per developed acre by 4%, and I know that's in the policy plan, and this is on a transit corridor, so increasing populations along the transit corridors to help with the use of transit as well, and creating walkable communities. The addition of the 12 units will help our housing scorecard, increasing the approved number to 641, and in this area it's the 243 of the 50% or below area median income. So I just wanted to let you know where we were on the scorecard with these units. This does include the Macy site. They are seeking about $3.8 million as a Spark loan. Again, it would be a forgivable loan. It's 6.8% of the budget. This is a $55 million project. We have been working pretty steadily with Ellers and Dorsey on sizing what is the gap for this development. And this is the number that was determined that is needed in order to make this project go. What are the cost drivers? Investor returns. You hear that a lot. Well, the truth of the matter is investors can invest anywhere. I mean, they can invest in residential, they can invest in anything, and they can invest anywhere in the world. And so when the market is doing well, investing in residential is less appealing. When the market does poorly, investing in residential is more appealing. And so it's really a market driven, and you have to meet the market in order to get the investment, or they walk. They don't care about the geography. Interest rates. Interest rates are volatile. They went down, then they went up. You know, they're not steady yet. There's no steady interest rate. The other cost drivers is they have to create 65 enclosed parking spaces for 7250. That they're not benefiting as a building of 7200, but it's a swap. 7250 is doing all the infrastructure, 7200 is creating their parking. The inclusion of the affordable units, there is a cost to that. They're not getting market rents for that. There's a cap on the rents they can collect, therefore they can't leverage as much debt because there's that loss of income. The sustainable building policy has costs associated with it. Going above building code, there's a cost, and that can be calculated. And some of the exterior design elements. So the current tax capacity is about 214,000 as vacant right now, today, when you're driving down France Avenue. That is what the tax capacity is. With the two projects, it's a little over about $2.25 million. With just 7250, it is reduced. If the site at 7200 remains a parking pad, the tax collected on that area that would help serve the pre-approved TIF district is reduced. So we have a redevelopment agreement in place that includes both sites. The existing agreement has 10% of the increment going to admin, with 90 being pledged towards 7250 and the infrastructure for the whole area. With the amended agreement, that is part 2 of this, we're proposing that we amend it to increase the percentage that goes to admin to 20% and reduce the amount that could go towards the project. One of those reasons is related to what you were talking about at the last project. With Macy's, it was 25% increment for admin that could be used for other infrastructure type costs. And so that's part of the rationale behind this. Without using Spark, we had contemplated amending the current redevelopment agreement and allowing some of that increment that's being collected to go to 7250. Instead, we said we have other public needs, and we could capture some of that increment from the development of both sites to help with some of that infrastructure. So we talked about Spark already, and and it is a use it or lose it type of funding, and there is that time commitment. And since it was intended by the state legislature to spur development, we created this legislation to get development going. And so this is one of those examples where this is one of those developments that could benefit from the use of those Spark funds. And, you know, I prepared this before seeing Bill's presentation. So requirements of Spark: new construction must create jobs, even construction jobs, and it must not be able to proceed without public financing. Without that close to $3.8 million, this project will not move forward. How have Spark funds been used? There was about 9.3 in the pool, and we have the Edina Theater, the Innovation Lab, small business grants that Bill did mention, the Finch, and now this, and then the 1.6 that would be going to Macy's. If this project is not approved, it'd be that 1.6 plus this 3.8. Loan terms it would be forgiven. They would have to deliver on 150 units of housing, 12 affordable that would be secured by a declaration of restriction covenants for perpetuity. They'd have to comply with the sustainable building policy. They'd have to deliver a go-ahead letter. That means all their financing would need to be in place and they would need to be able to break ground by July 1st. We deposit the spark funds with an escrow agent. So during the construction period, they would do draws, we'd evaluate the draws and pay from the title company, who would collect lien waivers, make sure all the due diligence was done and the work was completed for that draw. They would have to supply a certificate of completion that the project is done. We would true up the costs. And if the gap, we found out that material prices dropped, interest rates dropped, the costs did not come to what we thought they would be, the gap was reduced, we would only provide what was needed. So we would true up the costs before forgiveness. And there'd be a recorded declaration of restrictive covenants for the affordable units. So that with 5 minutes for discussion. What I'm asking again is to support our ability to go ahead and draft the documents where we could answer some of these questions more deeply with the documents. We would like to come back in December with some documents for your approval.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear, the compromise that's in here is to reduce the number of affordable units from 15 to 12 per our policy, but to make them affordable in perpetuity. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then so this will work very much like the loan we just talked about. It's a forgivable loan with the same mechanisms as what we just discussed.
Correct.
Okay, I think that's it.
Commissioner Agnew, any questions?
Yes, I do have one. So I took the total amount of the Spark component, the $3,700,000 and change, and divided that by 12 for 12 units, and came up with approximately $314,000 per unit.
Correct.
How does that feel to you?
That, from a math perspective, that is correct, and that would be high for an affordable unit. It's not just the affordable units. It's the 65 parking spaces that they are creating for 7,200 is also included within that. And the fact that there's, for the project as a whole, there's a gap. There's a gap. They can't, the numbers don't work, in part because of the parking spaces for 7,200, in part because of the affordable units. The gap created by the affordable units is not the $3.7 million, in part because of the sustainability policy. That also has created some of that gap. So there are multiple elements. Those cost drivers that I talked about, all of them have contributed to that $3.7 million. The 12 units of affordable maybe is about half of that.
Okay, thank you. The way that I think about this, and I think about kind of, it's not TIF, I know that, but it's similar in a lot of ways. And so when I think about us as a city deciding to invest into a property, I think about, as you're saying, what are the public benefits? I know that it's more intertwined than what cleanly shows the investment into those public benefits, particularly because of the 7250 site
Right.
and the investment that they're making. But when I hear 65 units or 65 parking spaces for the commercial site, like that's not, to me, a public benefit, right? I understand that that's a component of this, but if taking a step back, we didn't have this affordable housing as a factor to this, I wouldn't entertain an investment at all. Like, I believe that we should only be building things on this site that are economically viable. And so that's where, while it's maybe a little skewed, I think that it is relevant to say, when I take a step back and I'm looking at why should I invest into this? To me, the only really compelling component is the affordable housing. And so that's why I resort to doing that math.
Right.
And when I think about, you might not have put in a lot of analysis into this, right? But this is your business. So when we think about let's just say 314,000 per unit, like how does that compare to other investments that we're making into a unit of affordable housing across the rest of the community?
Chair Commissioners, when we did an analysis with our previous finance director, and we were talking about in December of 2022, the increasing the buy-in, we did calculate that a more equivalent buy-in amount would have been $320,000 per unit of non-affordable housing. Because over a 20-year period, you're not just losing that rent that 1 month or that 1 year, you're losing it, in this case, forever. So you're losing that gap. And so in a 20-year time block, we calculated the loss of rent between a market rate and affordable was $320,000. Now, would I, in an affordable, 100% affordable deal, it may cost $400,000 to build that affordable unit, but it doesn't just come from the city. It comes from tax credits, comes from the state, it comes from the county, it comes from Met Council, it comes from a variety of sources. So I would never suggest, well, I'm not going to say never. It's unlikely that I would come before you and request $314,000 per affordable unit and 100% affordable development, because there's so many other sources. In a market rate deal, when you have inclusionary, you don't have those other sources. The only source is the city. You can't go to the Met Council, you can't go to Hannah County or the state, because they don't look at these projects. And when we first designed the affordable housing policy, we thought the delta between the market rate rents and the affordable rents was enough to cover those losses. Interest rates are double what they were. Construction costs are significantly higher. So that delta, that market rate rent, no longer covers the losses from the loss of rent. So when you initially asked me, does it feel right, 314? No, because on an affordable housing deal, I would not suggest that. But that is truly the cost, the loss of rental income. Whether or not that equates directly with what they could leverage in debt financing, no, it's not a direct correlation because of NOI. There's lots of other factors, which is why I said that the gap cause may be less, but that is their losses.
Okay, thank you. That is extremely helpful, and I feel more comfortable with this knowing that 320,000 figure. So thank you for that. The last question then that I have is, one, I commend you on being able to find a solution here that results in permanently affordable units. But I know we don't typically see that. So can you briefly tell me how we're able to ensure that even through potential sales of the property?
Chair Commissioners, state legislation allows declarations for the use of affordability to last longer than a typical. There are other reasons why people might put restrictive covenants on a property. For affordable housing, they can go long. They can go forever. It's recorded against the land. So it stays on title. So even if the property sells, the declaration remains.
So there isn't a way for a future owner or for this to go away. It is locked in. We're protected.
It is recorded against the land.
Thank you.
And I will be bringing before you in December the declaration, and we're putting safeguards in that declaration that if they are not complying, I have come before you in the past with my report on compliance with affordable housing and market rate, and it's sketchy, on how much the compliance is. And in early projects, we have no recourse. So we are working on how to build in an element of recourse if they are not complying, even the next owner of this building.
Thank you.
Mr. Lindgren, do you have a comment on that? On that permanent affordability issue?
So, I agree with everything Ms. Hawkinson said, and I'm sorry I stepped out on the other matter for a moment, but But just so you get the whole picture of it is the way that you restrict the use is through a restrictive covenant, which under Minnesota law has always been limited to 30 years. So if we tried to restrict between our neighbors or ourselves, that's what it is. So it isn't permanent. The legislature within the last couple of years changed it with regard to affordable housing. So you can now have a perpetual covenant binding a land forever. So that's the way it would be written, and it's a good new tool, frankly.
Does that mean we can do it more often in the future with other properties?
Chair Commissioner, legally we can. It's costs money. It's expensive to keep a project with reduced rents forever, and it creates a hindrance on the owner if they wanted to sell because it is saddled with this restriction forever. So it's a negotiating tool.
So one thing I think it would be worth talking about is to take a step back and look how we got here and what the commitment was on TIF, because I think this would be important to the analysis of the overall potential approval. And that is that I think there's roughly 11.2 million in TIF that's already been approved for this project. Is that correct?
Chair, Commissioners, it's 7.5 million in the first note, and then another 1.6. So it's a little over. Oh, excuse me. I'm wrong. 7.5. I am going to refer to Nick because I don't have my numbers straight.
Yeah. So I think we need to frame up, because where we're heading in this direction, where I'm heading, is that we had a number that was approved, and we're trying to reduce that number of tax increment financing reliance by using spark funds that are use it or lose it. And there's nothing wrong with the TIF, use of the TIF, but we've got use it or lose it funds that we need to think about using here in the context of the overall commitments that we've made from a partnership standpoint on the project, which includes a lot more in my mind than what's been discussed so far this morning. Mr. Anhut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And not to take away, I think the presentation has said it, but right now, the HRA has made a commitment to provide $7.5 million worth of funding to 7250 in order to build out for both pads, all of the public realm improvements that have been negotiated as part of that agreement. So that remains in place, and you've pledged the ability to use 90% of the increment from this TIF district to serve that 7.5 million. That 7.5 was derived and negotiated based on some uncertainty about what was going to be built on the 7200 pad. There was a discussion of a hotel or a commercial use, and also maybe as just a surface parking. So that agreement specified, and I think that's where Ms. Hawkinson was going, was that we commit to about 5.6, I think is the actual number, $1 million of that 7.5 derived from 7250 in that office development. We tack on an additional amount up to the 7.5 million, assuming that something got built on that 7200, whether it was a hotel, whether it was a residential building, whether it was some other type of structure. And so that's the commitment that has already been made for that TIF district. The budget that was adopted for that TIF plan when it was approved accommodates all of that. Right now, with an actual certainty about a residential build on that, the dollar value that's potentially available within that TIF district is much higher, up at the $11 million figure that you're referencing, Mr. Chair. And so the decision, I think, is to decide whether or not we need to maybe utilize that tool to help service this development, or potentially use a different form of financing through the Spark program to alleviate the need to increase the TIF for this project. And both will do the same thing. Both will potentially deliver the project that's been approved by the council. Both will potentially deliver all the benefits that Ms. Hawkinson identified, but they are two different mechanisms. And so the Spark Fund would be money that you would put in right now. It would be forgivable loan based on completion of the project, delivery of all of those elements. But we could alternatively consider increasing the TIF amount to help pay for this potential development. Now, what would happen in that circumstance? Well, we've already committed that 90% of the increment goes to 7250, so it would have to be tacked on behind that commitment. It would potentially mean that we needed to keep this TIF district open for the full 26 years. If we use the spark funds, now we've got a sizable chunk of that we've got the revenue is still coming in to the TIF district, but now we are limited to just 7.5 million in actual obligations on that revenue. So now we actually think that we'd be able to get the funding for 7250 in place within about 16 years, and then you would be able to potentially terminate the TIF district. So it takes a sizable length of time off of that commitment to move forward with this proposal, with the Spark program, and delivering this building on the site. In addition, we were also saying that we recognize that that 90% commitment potentially was more than we originally thought, contemplating a different use of this property. So we are also proposing that you amend that agreement to limit it to now 80%, which will free up some additional capacity to either fund other affordable housing needs or potentially that underpass that is bridging this site across the street. That potentially will create something in the realm of 1.2 to 1.5 million of additional funding capacity, again, within that shorter time frame as well. And so those are I just wanted to make that clear for you all as you engage in this decision. There is an alternative, but it would require that we're maybe leveraging those funds for the full 26 years of the TIF district.
All right, good. That's very, very helpful. So actually what you're asking us to do today is just authorize you to go ahead and start a conversation with the developer about the potential use of Spark funds.
Chair, Commissioner,
Go ahead.
we've been in a couple months of discussions with them about the use of Spark funds. What I'm asking is that we proceed with drafting the documents for approval.
Yeah, but you got to come back to us to get the agreement approved.
Exactly.
But you want authority to go ahead and work further with the developer to actually draft a potential loan agreement that may potentially be approved by the HRA and the council.
Exactly. Okay. That is correct.
All right. So it's step one. And just a quick, it's just kind of a recap of what we did before with 7250. The reason we loaded the $7.5 million on the 7250 was I remember all of the infrastructure improvements were going to be made in conjunction with the construction of 7250. So the stormwater holding pond, if you will, that amenity and all the other public amenities were going to be built in conjunction with 7250, which is nearing issuance of a building permit now, I think. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay. Commissioner Jackson has a follow-on too? No? Okay. So any other questions, folks? Okay. Is there a motion to authorize staff to work with city advisors in drafting a loan agreement and associated documents for 7200 France using Spark funds, and authorize staff to prepare a first amendment to the 7200-7250 redevelopment agreement, reducing the percentage of increment pledged for potential future approval by the HRA?
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion and second. Motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Agnew to the motion as stated. Any further conversation on that issue? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Motion's approved. We'll go to the next phase, see where this takes us. Okay, very good. Thanks, gentlemen, for being here this morning from Orion. And did you have any supplemental comment?
The next item. Was it just an HRA comment or just director's report?
Yeah, that's what I was heading next. All right.
I'm actually going to turn it over to Bill and let Bill come forward and tell you what's in your packet.
Yeah, okay. That only took a couple seconds.
It'll just take a couple seconds.
The handoff.
Yeah. So we've been talking about this underpass, overpass, bridge crossing for well over a year now. In your packet is the feasibility report that is complete now. So in February of this year, we hired the engineers and planners at LHB Inc. to look into the general feasibility of actually building something under the road was the first choice. They finished that report. They found that it is technically feasible. They They found that there is a way to design it so that people will not only feel safe, but feel comfortable in that space. Have not made a determination on whether or not it's financially the right choice. That's still to be decided. But that report is in your packet. No action is needed today, but I wanted to just raise and alert you that it is there. At our city council next week, we will have a resolution prepared for you, recognizing that first step is done, and asking for your direction to continue looking into that with further study. So that'll be on next week's city council agenda.
Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you. Very briefly, Hennepin County and 9 Mile Creek Watershed District are also partners in this, who would have to approve any final agreement, correct?
Hennepin County is the regulatory agency and the owner. The park district, they
Not the park district.
Watershed district.
The watershed district.
the watershed district.
I think that's what I said.
you
9
said.
Mile
Oh,
Creek.
I'm
yeah.
sorry. I
Yeah.
misunderstood. I think there's a permit we need from the watershed district, but they
Okay.
don't have. They issue permits for everything. So.
Okay, so yeah, safety, water, engineering have not just us, but those agencies looking at it as well. In some capacity.
In some capacity, yeah. We've had a lot of conversation with Hennepin County, really looking at the transportation nature of it. So that's what has shaped where we are today. They did put some constraints that we were hoping that we wouldn't have to live with, but they were very clear that there are some constraints. And we've looked into the general geology and hydrology of the site, but we haven't applied for any permits or anything of that nature. That would all be forthcoming.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Acting Executive Director? Okay. Mr. Norf, would you send me that feasibility study independent of the?
Sure, happy to.
Thank you.
We'll also have it posted on the Better Together webpage.
Oh, good. That's a good idea. All right. Anything further from HRA commissioners? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Agnew moves we adjourn. Commissioner Jackson seconds the adjournment. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment of the HRA meeting this, 14th day of November, 2024, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. HRA stands adjourned, and we are going to reconvene in a couple minutes as the City Council to canvass the vote of the November 5th election.